Welcome, everybody. My name is John Colborn. I'm Executive Director of Apprenticeships for America, and I have a low-lift task today, which is really just to kick off this webinar, and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Harry Leach. Before I do that, a couple of bits of business here. First is if you've joined AFA webinars in the past, you know our tradition is we conduct these webinars in meeting format, which just allows for a conversation and a little bit of dialogue. But it also then requires that we ask people to put yourself on mute if you're not speaking. And another AFA tradition, we make very active use of the chat. Feel free to put your reactions, thoughts, questions in the chat. We'll use that to inform the Q&A portion of the webinar. And when we get to a place that we're able to take comments directly, just use the raise your hand feature to be recognized. And if you can't get that to work, just come off mute and barge your way into the meeting, and we'd love to have your comments. Um, and then let me also just say that we're coming to the end of our season of webinars. We're going to be taking a little bit of a break in August. But we do have a regular course of webinar events that are on our website at apprenticeshipsforamerica.org. The other thing I wanted to do today is I wanted to give a thanks to our friends at Trade Hunters and JM Arameni, who's on the webinar here waving. JM and team have been working with AFA on a variety of projects and ideas, looking at the application of staffing agencies as an apprenticeship solution. We really have appreciated the thoughtfulness and the innovative ideas that JM and his team have brought to this work. And we're very pleased that this report was able to be sponsored by the Trade Hunters Group. So thank you, JM, for that. I think without any further ado, as our numbers are growing here, I'm going to turn this over to Harry Leach, who's going to walk us through our agenda and our plan for today. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. Um, I am going to give a really quick summary up front of the briefing that we just put out. And then we're going to get on to our panel, which is the interesting bit. So we're going to be hearing from some leaders in the field later. If we could get the slides up, that would be great, Freddie. So I'm just going to quickly talk through, some of the context, why we're talking about the staffing industry and apprenticeship together, a bit about kind of why staffing agencies are particularly suited, why we think they're suited to the apprenticeship intermediary role, and then the flip side, what are the benefits for staffing agencies in adopting the apprenticeship model. And we'll talk briefly about some of the challenges that we're seeing currently in that adoption and what's needed to kick things forwards and really scale things up. Then we'll get to our panel. So this will be a summary of the full report. Full report covers this and a little bit more. We've got some analysis of international models in there, some case studies of successful US models. Freddie, if we could present the slides and go to slide 3, please. Great, and yeah, if we could just skip to slide 3. Thank you. So why are we talking about this? For a bit of context for anyone who's newer to AFA, we really care about growing apprenticeships. We think we should have 6 or 7 times more apprentices than currently. I think the US has got the capability to sustain 4 million active apprentices opposed to the 700,000 of today. And what's stopping us from getting there? Well, one of the big things we hear about a lot is complexity. So the GAO, Government Accountability Office, did some work last year looking at where they ask employers what was preventing them from hiring apprentices. Among other things, their main answer was administrative burden, or at least the perception of burden is stopping employers from getting involved. So growing apprenticeships beyond our current levels is going to require removing that friction from employers. What we see in other countries is they've successfully used multi-employer intermediary models to get rid of that barrier. Organizations organizing on behalf of employers, doing the kind of hard work of apprenticeship behind the scenes. This is a developing field in the US. It's, lots of AFAs, network intermediaries in different forms. And we think that one type of intermediary that's really promising but pretty unexplored is staffing agencies. And yeah, I want to just talk about these numbers a little bit. If we care about scaling apprenticeship, we should care about staffing agencies because of those numbers. We're talking about a $200 billion industry in the US that's making 9.5 million placements a year. We've got this, ready-made network of 27,000 agencies across the country covering, national, regional, local, covering most fields of employment. We put some of the top fields there. So yeah, just to give a bit of context on that scale, we often use 2.3% as a kind of apprenticeship adoption number because that's the international average amongst kind of countries with a developed apprenticeship system. 2.3% of the labour market are apprentices. If that applied to staffing agency contract workers, that would be 220 new apprentices a year. So a huge boost on where we're at currently. If we could skip to the next slide, please, Freddie. I want to talk a bit about why we think staffing agencies are a good fit for apprenticeship. I'm not going to go through all of these. It'll be a bit boring. There's a detail in the report. I don't want to steal our panel's thunder. But I'll just pick out a few of them. Firstly, just to be clear, we at AFA don't think every staffing agency is a fit for apprenticeship. Some will be serving jobs or industries where it doesn't really fit. Some will be, purely operating kind of short-term placements that don't have the kind of the length required for a good apprenticeship program. So we're talking about a set of staffing agencies who really care about talent development and see that as, part of their business model. We're going to hear from some of those agencies who are already doing it here. But yeah, just to pick out a few of why we think there's a good case to expand the staffing agency role in apprenticeship. Staffing agencies are kind of built to hide the wiring from employers. Their whole model is to make things easier for their employers, for their clients, deal with the compliance, regulation, bureaucracy, administrative tasks back to the GAO report I mentioned at the start. We know this is one of our big barriers. We know that staffing agencies already do this in a very similar way. Um, Staffing agencies, the model is very well inclined for a multi-employer model. That means you can split the cost of training an apprentice across employers. So, there's another barrier there they can address. That kind of design and nature of working with multiple employers can also get rid of that, poaching problem, first mover problem that often disencourages employers from investing in training. Staffing agencies distributing that cost can get rid of the risk. And, a simple point, but we have this pre-existing network of staffing agencies that have been operating for a long time. They have the employer relationships and trust. That's often the hardest part for, people new to the space to build is those employer relations. Just going ahead to the next slide. I want to talk briefly about, the argument on the other side, why staffing agencies should be thinking about apprenticeship, as part of the services they can offer and how they can benefit. Above all, we'd see this about quality. Staffing agencies depend on having a quality product, a high quality placement. That's how they, get and retain clients. And we know that the apprenticeship model has, a proven, it leads to productive employees. So there's a kind of quality of product argument for agencies to think about here. It can also just add an additional area of activity, especially in times where unemployment is lower, there's less churn in the labor market, the sort of traditional worker placement model is less effective. Having that kind of structured training arm can be an additional service. And then on a similar point to quality, we know that apprentices tend to have higher retention rates than other employees. Staffing agencies depend on retention, so there's another case there. And then the final one here is kind of solving a systemic challenge. So in particular industries, agencies can end up kind of rotating the same group of skilled workers around a firm. That drives up prices in many ways. What apprenticeship can do is expand that talent pool. You're creating a new pipeline of workers into that industries. You can lower costs for employers while at the same time expanding opportunities. We put a big caveat here, as we have in the report, that the commercial case for staffing agencies right now is not a slam dunk. Um, we're going to hear about this from our panel later, but especially the public funding situation in apprenticeship right now means the commercial case can be a bit up and down. We think that's something that should change in the future. Skipping on to the next slide, please. So we're about to hear from some of the agencies who have successfully adopted the apprenticeship model. They're going to talk much more eloquently about this than I will, but just to set out a little bit of the challenges we heard when we were out there kind of speaking to the field. Mentioned on the last slide, the commercial case isn't fully proven. We know we've got some practitioners who have been able to make the finances work out. We're going to hear from them, but it's not easy. We heard a lot that finances are a tricky barrier here for agencies trying to get involved in apprenticeship. Regulatory friction, I don't think this will be a surprise to anyone involved in an apprenticeship. There is a lot to wade through, but we also have a specific lack of clarity about the staffing agency involvement in registered apprenticeship. Can they sponsor or not? There is some guidance, but it's not necessarily widely understood and not uniform across the country, so that can make things tricky. And then a slightly broader point, as I mentioned earlier, there will be staffing agencies that aren't suited to apprenticeship. We'll hear a bit from our panel about why they got into it to help illustrate this point. If we go on to the next slide, please, Freddie. Talked a bit very quickly about why staffing agencies are suited to apprenticeship, what's in it for them, those barriers, and that size of the prize if we can get more staffing agencies involved. Um, in the briefing, we set out what we think is needed to grow staffing agency activity in apprenticeship. Um, I don't think there's anything super complicated here or super surprising to long-time AFA watchers. Firstly, we need straightforward, predictable, sufficiently scaled, formula-based per apprentice funding that staffing agencies can use to make that commercial case work. Um, we need clarity on the policy about staffing agency involvement in apprenticeship. That just needs to be well understood across the country. We need funding that covers that upfront investment, especially in a short-term environment. It can be difficult to make the case. There's an argument for helping intermediaries get established. And then we just put a sort of general plea for policymakers to consider staffing agencies when states and industries are thinking about apprenticeship expansion. Um, if we go on to the next slide, please. Oh, sorry, we can keep the slides down. That's fine. That's a summary of the report, very quick one. The whole report is out there. John, if you could put a link in the sidebar if you haven't already done so, that would be great. Enough from me. We're gonna bring in our panel. So we have some fantastic speakers for you. Shari, Michelle, Joe, and Ashwin, all leaders in the field who are all running successful programs with a real mix of experiences, different industries, different experience with going down the registered route or not. So yeah, we're really pleased to bring this panel together. Um, I'm not, if we could spotlight, I can actually do this. Okay, brilliant. I'm not actually going to ask you guys to introduce yourself, as I'm sure we're going to hear about you, over the course of the questions. But I want to kick off with a bit of an introductory question. What is the problem that you're solving for employers? What got you started down the apprenticeship route? Why did you get into this? Let's start with Shari.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you, Harry. I would say, what is it in staffing? It's recruiting and retention, right? So, about 8 years ago, we were facing that huge recruiting problem and also trying to ascertain how do we lower our turnover rate? How do we help our employers keep that retention that they're looking for? And so with that, we really dug into what can we bring in different types of training. We got involved in the soft skills training. We got involved in virtual reality training. And this was all around the time with the universities that it brought us to the table of apprenticeship. And people at that point, states were trying to ascertain what is an apprenticeship and how do we really bring this forth to industries other than our skilled trades. And so it was perfect timing because it was really ahead of the curve. And as we started learning about that, it seemed to be the answer to that recruiting and retention issue that we were really looking to resolve. And you'll hear a lot today about statistics, about the changes that apprenticeship makes in the ability to recruit and then really that ability to retain.
Brilliant. Thank you, Shari. Ashwin, let's go to you next. I'm sure a lot of that resonates to you, but yeah, what's the problem that Revature is solving?
Absolutely. And once again, thank you, Harry. And what Shari said 100% resonates. See, in my opinion, with what we Revature are doing and what I'm seeing staffing industries or staffing companies doing a similar model, it fundamentally solves three things, right? Why are companies using staffing talent? The core reason is they need just-in-time talent with zero or minimal learning curve for them to start doing the work. That's one of the core requirements for staffing. On the other hand, apprenticeship program, fantastic model, but that has a learning curve. And how do you combine both? I think that is what the staffing companies combine both, right? So by taking the risk of apprenticeship, by taking the risk of recruitment and training, we take the upfront investment, upfront time to enable them so they go and start working at the employer base with minimal or no learning curve, and they're being productive right from day one. So the same behavior of staffing talent is retained. At the same time, the value of apprenticeship is also benefited. So that's why we believe our employees are engaging with this. Just to add two more additional thing is, apprenticeship requires bulk planning, long-term vision and everything. So they tend to do it like once a year or twice a year. Model like ours, staffing companies can offer this throughout the year, 365 days a year. I think that is another more value we bring. The last piece is, Harry, your first point, which is hiding the wiring, right? Like we take all the risk, we hide the entire wiring by taking care of recruitment, training, everything. And that is also a huge value for the employer. So in my personal experience and seeing other companies do this, these are the three core values that I believe employees get from us.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ashwin. Michelle, I'm going to come to you next. YUPRO Placement, I've got a bit of a unique story here. What got you started along the apprenticeship route?
Yeah, it is unique. We are a for-profit public benefit staffing organization owned by a nonprofit. Many on the call know Europe United. And in 2014, the founder started a staffing firm to ensure that the graduates of their training program, which is really in essence a pre-apprenticeship, could move into full-time employment for the length of their career. And we saw during the pandemic, clients were really struggling with needing folks that had additional skills outside of training programs. And we also found 50 other nonprofits and many more and states also needed a solution for employers saying, we need a bit more skilled workers. These programs are fantastic, but there are skills and opportunities that we really need for this untapped talent population to have. And so we created a solution that bridges the training and the employment, because the other piece that the staffing industry is here to do is take, as Ashwin said, the risk of the compliance, hide the wiring. They didn't want to place some of the folks coming out of programs on their payroll yet because they're not proven commodities quite yet. And so we changed that mindset and built on the job training programs that naturally moved into apprenticeship programs because they are good jobs with wages. And so that has now become our turnkey solution to pull infrastructure solutions. And so that's how we got into it. It really was a unique story, and now we're helping states, nonprofits, and employers with how to just remove the friction and support their administration of an apprenticeship program.
Brilliant. Thanks, Michelle. Joe, I'm afraid I've picked on you last, so but I'm sure there's a lot of that
Yeah,
resonates.
right.
Tell us about SkillStorm and how you got started with
Yeah,
apprenticeship.
well, thank you. And it's essentially, I'm going to echo a lot of what you and the fellow panelists have said. In SkillStorm's experience, the company was founded as an IT services company in 2002, primarily servicing both the financial services industry and the federal services industry. And the problem has never really been finding positions to fill. It's about finding people to fill the positions and finding people with the right skill sets. As you know, in the tech industry, those skill sets evolve fairly rapidly. So people have to reskill and upskill all of the time. So our approach was, look, we really need to think about how we can help employers save cost and also help candidates who have the aptitude and ability to fill those open roles. Because what's typically happened for the past 20 or 30 years is that it's been a carousel, right? So somebody will move from Bank of America to Wells Fargo to Citibank, and that just drives up cost. It continues to spiral costs without actually creating a major impact in the actual number of people in the workforce. So the problem that we're trying to solve for the employers and our clients that we work with is one that is closing that skills gap and giving people an opportunity to fill various roles and to launch and accelerate their career, and also to provide a group of engineers that can hit the ground running immediately. So it's really solving a skills gap problem and a financial problem as well. And I'll come on more to that later on.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joe. I actually want to go straight onto that financial problem. Let's talk about the revenue model here. We've heard, this is the biggest challenge currently, not just for staffing agencies, for a whole host of intermediaries out there. But it'd be great to hear a bit more about how you're funding your apprenticeships. Is this all employer funded? Are you accessing public funds? What's the balance there? Joe, we'll come straight back to you because you're about to dive into it.
Yeah, sure. No problem. So at SkillStorm, it's primarily employer-led funding. We have about 300 registered apprenticeships, and I'll come on to how some of that is funded momentarily. But everything we do today is driven by our clients and employers of the engineering teams that we're developing. And it starts with what are the set of requirements that you need, right? What are the group of skills that you need? What you're trying to solve? What is the capability that you need? And then we'll build teams of engineers to that capability. There are a number of instances over the last 3 years where we've actually been able to form registered apprenticeships in cloud, in cyber, and in software development. We've been able to do that successfully, working with an intermediary, and the intermediary we're working with was Apprenti. And that significantly helped us because that can provide funding, and it did provide funding. And it also helped us by providing some administrative support as well in that process, because as we know, and you mentioned at the outset of this call, there is an administrative burden to managing the apprenticeship from start to finish, whether that's pre-apprenticeship or whether that's for the full duration of the apprenticeship. There's an administrative load there that needs to be managed. There's also the administrative load that needs to be managed when applying for a certain type of apprenticeship, right? Whether that's a cloud, cyber, or platform apprenticeship. So it's managing that. We today do not rely on on public funding for this, whether at a federal level, a state level, or a local level. It's all employer driven. However, we do, where appropriate and where it makes sense, tap into various workforce investment boards and to various entities where we can access funding in specific areas.
Cheers, Shari. Who else wants to jump in on this question of revenue model?
I can take quickly, Harry, I can do that. So same as what Joe mentioned, see, our model, we're doing this since 2008. And like roughly 200 enterprises are participating in the program, and we have enabled over 20,000 engineers in this model, right? So the model has always been employer pays and employer paid. So what that means is the entire program is funded by training. Everything is funded by us, not charging any of our clients upfront. Plus, we also, they are our W-2 employees with benefits, right? Because if we
Ashwin, sorry, I think you've just gone on mute.
Can you hear me? Okay, I don't know when I went on mute. How long?
Could you repeat?
3 seconds or so.
Okay, got it. So the model, as we were saying, is employer paid and employer pays. So we take care of entire cost for training, infrastructure, and everything. We don't charge the clients until they are deployed. The second thing, why we also, all the people that go through our program are our W-2 employees with benefits. The reason being, we are not giving them a temp jobs. We are giving them a path for a full-time employment with these organizations, right? So we need to make sure that the salary and benefits has to start from the beginning. So it has been our model fully like that. So the upfront investment is ours. Once they're done, once they work for the clients, like any staffing company, we get an hourly rate. Then we have our cost of what we pay our employees. The difference, the spread is our margin based on which we get the return on investment. So that has been our model since inception for all the people that we have deployed.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ashwin.
So I'm going to jump in because we're a little bit different, and Michelle, you're a little bit different. So I hope this shows how you as staffing companies, you all do different models, right? There's different financial models that you have. We are an intermediary. So what that means, and Joe, you spoke to that, you use an intermediary, the intermediary brings funding. I am in the midst of submitting a huge grant again today. It's like this ongoing cycle of writing grants, but we do that because we want to bring funding to our employers. And so our motto is always seek funding to help to support the employers first. And if that is not there, then it goes into a fee-based. And so the funding can come from federal, state, local. It can be working with a partner that has funding. It can be going out to foundations. They can support there's a lot of reasons why foundations are looking to upskill. There's funding for urban, there's funding for rural, there's all types of funding. And so that in and of itself is a little bit of its own ecosystem. But we want to support that for our employers. We found that, to what others are saying, there's a huge burden in writing and getting an apprenticeship approved. So if we don't have funding, that would be kind of a consulting fee. And then if you are bringing people in as a pre-apprenticeship, that can be in the model of your staffing markup. And so there's different ways that you can look at this. And believe me, I've said this so many times, we have kissed so many, frogs out there trying to figure out what is this model over the past 8 years. And this world is changing and changing fast. And so I can say it is a one size fits all. But our primary focus is really looking at how can we go after funding and bring it back to our employers to help them in setting up these programs.
And to wrap it up, I think what's really important, because we have such a variety of audience and listeners between staffing organizations, nonprofits, other intermediaries, employers are already used to paying recruiting fees, recruiters, administrative fees, burdens on payroll, insurance, etc. They're already used to it from a staffing firm markup perspective. So when you get into this and you build your infrastructure, typically you can do it more efficiently and cost effective and go after opportunities. So, for example, if Shari goes after a grant and she is the administrator of that grant and I'm the sponsor of the apprentices, I can draw off of Shari's grant and I can offset the employer cost with that grant money. But at the end of the day, most employers are used to, okay, what is this going to cost me? And why an intermediary in a staffing organization is so attractive is because so many enterprise organizations do not want to put a solve that piece of it. And then for the other folks on the panel, they also have really incredible training programs braided into that. So I think it's important for organizations to know there are options, but at the end of the day, solving the employer need and the cost of what it would be for them to do it on their own, like they're already thinking about that. So if you can offset that with some pay for performance grant money, it's a win-win situation.
That's a great point. We're not trying to offset everything, all the costs that an employer should bear, but there is something there that makes it a much more attractive proposition. I think just out of the last couple of questions, we've hinted at there are different roles, very different roles for staffing agencies here. Some acting as an intermediary, some sponsored, some running registered programs, some unregistered. I want to dig into a bit of the differences there and what you're seeing. Ashwin, I'm gonna come to you. So you're running apprenticeship programs, but you've chosen not to go down that formal, registered, regulated route. Why not? What are the challenges and difficulties with the model for you?
So for the record, I want to be a registered apprentice, which I am not. Probably I'm the only outlier here. And I'm also a free market capitalist. I like money, so I don't discriminate public money, private money. So the reason is like a couple of things, right? One is the predictability is not there. I'm not able to bring that into my unit economics. So at this point, we exactly give predictability. What is an entry criteria for our employees? What is that we pay them? And what is the cost of our employers to work with? Everything is absolutely predictable. With this, I can't tell them, oh, I did not get this funding, so I can't pay this. Or I did not get a funding, so employers, you pay me a delta more. Or I did not have funding, so I can't start this program until I start the funding. The predictability for me is not there into the unit economics piece of it for me. Right? That's a problem for me. The second challenge for me is, I hope that's not the case now because I tried this a while ago. That's when I checked. I hope it's better now. The paperwork and everything is too cumbersome, right? Like we need to submit this, submit that. And a lot of our clients, right? Like we work with 7 out of the top 10 banks, 3 out of the top 10 asset managers, largest retailer, several government agencies. It's one of the mandate to ask what they're doing. My clients don't want to share what they're doing, that these are confidential information, right? Like monitoring that and everything, right? They don't want to do this. So the paperwork, how invasive this paperwork, how frequent it is, it just reached a point we were stressing our employers, and we just realized the benefit that we get from it versus what we have to go through was not worth it, and that's why we stopped it. And having said that, I'm absolutely open for getting guidance from successful people and follow their lead.
Ashwin, it's like you're speaking from the AFA cheat sheet. So to turn it around the other way, if we want Ashwin to turn his 20,000 engineers into registered apprentices, we need predictable, long-term, sustained funding.
Yep.
Joe, you mentioned earlier that you've recently gone through registration. You're running both unregistered and registered with the help of Apprenti. Why did you choose to go down that route? What would make you do more registered?
Yeah, I think to be fair, all the challenges Ashwin raised are real and legitimate concerns. And that's why, to start off with, everything we do, similar to Ashwin, it's all employer-based funding. So we don't rely on any type of apprenticeship funding from whatever agency at all. We look at that as additional and supplemental today. The reason we've gone down the path, I think, is twofold. One, it essentially creates a set of standards that where we can apply them, we will, and that employers can get comfortable with the skills and the competencies and the rigor of what we're providing. And many employers actually do like that. They did share some of those concerns, Ashwin, at the beginning, which is, how much work is this going to be? What's the burden? How often are you going to be engaging the people who are on projects and all of that? But once you overcome that, it can be very beneficial, not just to the employer, because you're creating essentially these healthcare checks with the people who are going through the apprenticeship. They're making sure that they've got the skills and the competencies necessary. But in addition to that, it also helps with candidate recruitment as well, because what you're saying to the candidate is, look, we care about your professional development, so much so we've now got an official set of official standard of skills and competencies that we're going to make sure that you have by the end of this apprenticeship. And we're going to support you, and we're making that investment all of the way. And then, the third reason, and quite frankly, is that there was funding available at the time that was working with an apprenticeship intermediary, which I'd highly recommend, was easy for us to tap into. So it took some of the load, administrative burden from SkillStorm. And it also helped provide rigor as well to the apprenticeship program, which we were very grateful for.
Thanks, Joe. So just to paraphrase you, some funding, a grant maybe got you in the door, but after that, there's a whole set of circumstances, including things on the kind of the learner side that you see as a benefit.
Yeah, there's benefits to the employers for sure. There's benefits to the learners, right? You're creating a standardized process. We can get into the challenges. Some of the challenges are that, not everything fits into those boxes. So as AI is evolving, how do you have an apprenticeship there? It can take a lot of time and effort. So that's why we pick and choose the apprenticeship programs that we participate in, based on what the skill sets are, what the pre-approved apprenticeship programs are, and whether that's going to all fit nicely together in the timeline we need to work with the client.
Cheers, Joe. Michelle, you've run both registered and unregistered processes. Can you tell us a bit, does what Joe's saying resonate with you? Can you tell us a bit about the different approaches that you've taken?
Absolutely. I think we use unregistered for speed and scale, and we use it for pilots. When you have a new employer that isn't quite sure how this is going to go, or you have some smaller numbers, they might have some unique needs, the unregistered route is a great way to pilot and proof of concept, proof of retention, proof of training, and all the things that Joe just shared. Like, it's also good for the candidate recruiting piece, because you are able to be more nimble. There is, we all would love for the paperwork to be less. It's just not our reality right now. So I would say to staffing firms really interested in this, if we want to get to the apprenticeship DOL status, start small and prove it and build your muscle and infrastructure and prove the model in an unregistered format. And that's what we did for a period of time, and then built up to be an approved intermediary. And we started to understand the process through that intermediary, all the different services that staffing firms can offer as an intermediary. And then the next step is to jump in and be a sponsor and understand the compliance in those pieces. So I think that there is a progression that could be really natural for staffing firms to jump into this, because you don't have to, your first step doesn't have to be registration. it can be the other things that support our workforce infrastructure for everybody on the call that is involved in apprenticeships. Staffing firms can serve other purposes for other entities so that other entities are able to scale. So I can be a sponsor to another nonprofit or a state and help them scale DOL programs. And then we're serving the same goal.
That's a great point. It's not a one size fits all model. There's lots of different roles here, and lots of different partnerships. Um, Shari, on a similar line, I think you've been there from the start and built up Hamilton Ryker's apprenticeship program. What would your advice be to other staffing agencies, new to apprenticeship, thinking about getting into it? What would your advice be?
I really think that looking at this is like looking at any other business opportunity. How is it going to affect you strategically? And what is it that what is your vision and how does it help you get there? We've said it 3 times today or more. It's not for everyone, but if your vision is to really be a trusted advisor for your employers and your clients, if your vision is to help them with strategic workforce solutions, then I think you should consider it. Because as you're looking at this, and I mentioned when I did my intro, it was recruiting and retention, right? It's our bread and butter in staffing. So I want to just share a morning meeting that I had with a healthcare system this morning. We're meeting, we're talking about they've never done apprenticeship, they're learning about it. And we do have a grant that we can bring some resources to them, but we as the intermediary would then help to set the program up and support the program. And it was so interesting because the one person, they're in a hospital system, she said, it cost us about $50,000 to onboard one nurse. And if that nurse leaves, it is a huge cost. And we're really interested in changing our retention rate because we know that's where the ROI would be with this. And again, apprenticeships help in retention rate. So as you're looking at, is this something that makes sense to us? Imagine the difference of going out and being able to say, versus another staffing company, that you have this workforce solution that you can bring that increases recruiting, that increases retention, and that the employer can continue to do their work and you have support to help you onboard this program into their facility. It just makes such a difference. And I think it's then taking it to what Michelle said. There's different models, right? So it's deciding in staffing, are we going to build our own technology software? Are we going to purchase? Are we going to do payroll ourselves or are we going to outsource? You have to decide, are you going to set up your own apprenticeship division where you become educated in this, where you understand the nuances, where you take on those roles, such as the sponsorship, where you now are reporting and you're having the compliance that's coming back to you? Are you the one that is going to provide that intermediary that you are taking on all of this for all of your employees or your employers, excuse me, or are you going to, decide that I'm going to outsource this, give it to another intermediary, and then just bring the solution into my employers? So you can either decide to go all in, like I'm going to build my own software solution, I'm going to build my own apprenticeship division, I'm going to become that sponsor, have all of those end results and take on all that responsibility, or I'm going to bring an intermediary in to do that and then bring the benefit to the employer. So those would be the choices that you're making. But I think when you're looking at, everything is, a value proposition, right? So when I set this up, what's the risk of me doing it? I would ask you, what's the risk of you not doing it? If all of your competitors are really jumping into this and they are training employees, then what do you have? You're not. You are trying to find that person who already has the skill set, and that is just going to be harder and harder and harder.
That's a great point, and I really like your there's lots of different roles and functions here. You need to figure out exactly where you're going to be, and your retention point as well. We actually looked at this in the UK and found your new hire costs are almost always going to be bigger than your training costs. So it's a great sales point. Anyone else want to come in on this question of what would your advice be to staffing agencies thinking about coming into apprenticeship?
Right, I'll jump in. I would say any firm that is built on rapid, transactional, high volume, low margin placement, because there is a staffing model for that. Apprenticeship probably isn't your natural extension. But if you have the ability to really look at apprenticeship as if you are serving your very best client, and building infrastructure around how you would support your very best client in your agency, that's how you need to think about your commitment to apprenticeship, no matter what role you play. And I say that passionately because there are folks on the Hill and policymakers and a reputation that staffing is transactional and just in it for the margin, and there isn't retention, and you throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks and then throw another person. Like, there is still a reputation that many of us work very hard to overcome. So if there are some bad actors in apprenticeship, it is going to ruin it for the industry, because AFA, ASA, and several of us are trying to work with the DOL to put out a public policy that states that staffing firms can serve a very positive momentum building space for apprenticeships. But a handful of bad actors could really make that very difficult for the industry to support registered apprenticeship program expansion. And so it really needs to be taken seriously and not lightly on how you're helping solve your talent pipeline for your clients. And if you're a staffing firm that wants to figure this out, reach out to one of us. Reach out. That reputation, right, stays intact and improves as we all work together to just do this so much better and help expand.
That's a fantastic point, Michelle. I think you've got a lot of support for that. I'm going to ask one more question and then I'll open this up, because we've got a lot of questions in the chat. And Katrina, I see you've got your hand up as well, so I'll come to you in a second. Final question from me. We're going to do quick fire round, one each. If you had the ear of the White House, you're telling them, how we're going to hit 1 million registered apprenticeships in the next few years. What's your one piece of advice? Ashwin, to put you on the spot, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you. So it's a thing. See, for me, I would say lead by example, right? Like, US federal government is the largest employer in the country. Make some substantial, meaningful number as a mandate to be getting through this program, right? Lead by example and do a proper reporting, not just making an announcement, right? Do a reporting of how it is performing, what's successful. Let the public sector lead the way for the private sector to follow, right? Because I think I would say just lead by example, make it mandate, make the number meaningful, right? I think that's what it is. The rest of the things, predictability, ease to work, everything is great, but I think there'll always be a problem. Companies should be okay with it. But I would say you're spending a lot of money in employment, lead by example for this.
Ashwin, it's like you're an AFA plant. Our next report is about public sector apprenticeships coming out in a few months.
I have a spy camera in yours and John's.
Shari, what would your advice be?
Well, I think the paper is wonderful, and that gives, great advice. And I highly encourage everybody to read that paper. I think we really need to work on a consistency of, from the federal to the state. And I know the states can run their own apprenticeship offices, but there are a lot of national companies, and it makes it very hard to scale when there's so many disparate rules and regulations into apprenticeship programs. And so I was encouraged by the bulletins about making it easier because there's some states that take a year to approve an apprenticeship program. That is not helping. I think it is really, to Ashwin's point, the national example, national marketing that, flows down the whole way. We really have to continue to work on the marketing of the apprenticeship and including these things about how do you implement. It's not just this is great, but how do you get from this is great to get it done? And I think we need some help on that with easing the restrictions, with more consistent funding. It does not help us when we start funding and we stop funding, and then we say we're going to fund a sector, but then we don't fund the sector. And, or, there's just so many stop and starts. And I know that AFA has done the heavy, heavy, heavy lifting on pay for performance, but boy, it needs some work. And I hope we just keep working on it because we're not quite there. So I could go all day on this, but I'm going to turn it over to my other friends.
No, Shari. So consistency, simplicity, maybe some long-term predictability there. Joe, let's come to you, please.
Yeah, well, look, I'd agree with my fellow panelists here, but to say something slightly different, what we've seen working very heavily in the federal services sector is, a large portion of the jobs need to be US citizens and green card holders. And if we're going to invest in the American workforce, I actually think that there might be an opportunity if we want to get to 1 million or 2 million really quickly. You could regulate, or you could, incentivize and encourage, other regulated sectors like financial services, energy, healthcare, to hire Americans and invest in the young American and aspiring American workforce. And I think that would have a major impact in reaching that goal. There's been a lot of talk, about, visas and things like that. And I think the biggest impact that we could have in the digital economy is to invest in homegrown talent here. And that's where I think we could start, in financial services and healthcare and energy and other regulated industries where we actually show a commitment to the American workforce.
Great point, Joe. If we're trying to onboard industries, we need to think about the kind of domestic talent part of that equally. Michelle.
Try to be quick. I know we want to get to questions. I would say, DOL, if you want to get your math working and fill the gap to 1 million, pull together a staffing consortium of leaders in the industry that are willing to commit and put their money where their mouth is. And let's get going and give a staffing consortium pilot some funding and get it going. Because we have access to employers, we have access to talent, we have access to infrastructure that's already there. And I think the quickest way to 1 million is to get the staffing industry leaders that are committed to it to fill the gap. And I'm convinced that we could help them get to 1 million with 200,000 registered apprenticeship programs in less than 12 months. But it will not happen without federal support, public support, and congressmen and folks sitting in the seats say, yes, go to your staffing agencies and get them to help you.
That is a very interesting idea, Michelle. Thank you for sharing. Brilliant. I'm going to open up for questions. I'm afraid we've got too little time and too many questions. So I'm going to go first to people with their hands up, and then I'll try and pick a few from the chat. Katrina, can I start with you, please? You've been waiting patiently.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Katrina Gray. I'm the apprenticeship director for Central Community College in the middle of Nebraska. So we're a very rural area. I've been looking for a long time on how to work with staffing agencies. We are the sponsor. We go out and we partner with the businesses. And then when we partner with the businesses, we ask them what staffing agency they are with. And then we utilize the staffing agency as a pre-apprentice for our employer. And then we do all the work for our staffing agency. We provide a software system, Apprenticescope or WorkHands. We are converting to. We don't have our employers pay, but our apprentices are. They are employees of the employers, and then also our apprentices have a career coach throughout the duration of their apprenticeship time. And so that's how we retain and sustain employment, and also connect with our staffing agency as them being the pre-apprenticeship of the program. And when the 90 days comes up, then the employer then will advance their staffing temp into their apprenticeship program, and they'll continue doing that moving forward. So that's one of the ways that we do it. Maybe connect with your local community colleges if they're sponsors. They might be able to help in that way. But that is something that we do with our staffing agencies. But we're in a rural area too. So it's a little bit harder to do some of the things that you're talking about with the money and having our employers pay, because they're afraid of paying for apprenticeships, and apprenticeships are free. You know what I mean? Apprenticeships are free. So they're paying for your services to help them get onboarded and registered and implement and hire and all that stuff. So it's just a different way of looking at it.
Thanks, Katrina. That's a really useful example of like the type of partnership we're talking about from the other side here. So thanks for sharing. Lonnie, I'm going to come to you. If we could be quick, please. We haven't got too much time left.
Harry, these folks know me, and I'm not quick, but I'll try to do it this time. I just want to summarize and then say one thing from a different view. So in other words, I've been running apprenticeship programs for 20 years, and we've been doing this at Apprenticely since 2019 as an intermediary sponsor. But let me put on my employer hat for a minute. So for 40 plus years, I was the guy sitting on the other side of the table listening to all these ideas about, how to enhance my workforce. I would just say this: there are 4 distinct strategies. Companies know how to go to campus and hire. Companies know how to post a job and get an experienced hire. They know how, many of them, and you guys know this better than anybody, how to work with contract staffing. What they don't understand is how to grow their own. And that's been the message of apprenticeship since day one. And I think in concert of how we work together, and I've mentioned a few things in the chat about not everything fits. There is not a one-size-fits-all answer here from an employer perspective. But when we can find that overlap based on things that were mentioned about retention, things that were mentioned about where is the proper fit from a margin, from a financial standpoint, there is a crossover that says when you have an intent to work with an employer and use the apprenticeship and you start it as a staffing firm, and where is that connection to the employer saying, this is my long-term strategy. Either I, don't have co-employment and I eventually hire them or convert them. I think the pay for performance is part of this solution, because some of that can replace the margin that you were charging an employer. That when we started doing what we did, people said we were competing with staffing firms, and we weren't, but we were eliminating the cost perspective that an employer cared a lot about. And so if we can work together to take the strengths of every organization, what does staffing do well? What do employers have to do? What does an intermediary sponsor do that shouldn't have to be done by people that aren't prepared to do it? And where does the training come from? And how do you use the funds appropriately? To me, we've got a solution here. It's not for everything, but I think it fits. And I think working with you guys and staffing firms, you've already got some partners. I think there is a solution there, Harry. And I think we've touched on many of those because this panel has demonstrated where the successes are.
Thanks very much, Lonnie. I'm afraid we are over time, but Bob, I'm going to give you the last word, but very briefly, please.
Yeah, hard to go after Lonnie with all his experience. My one thought is, let's see if we can't mobilize not just you guys in the field, but also all the large firms to be advocates for the kind of pay for performance that can provide that sustained funding to go along with the simplicity aspects that Shari talked about and other reforms. we can do some of these other reforms with very little funding, but I think to add the country is not really living up to itself by emphasizing only the post-secondary college approach to learning for careers. And if we could get the advocacy to use a small part of that to finance a paper performance, a paper apprentice element, I think we could go a long way toward incentivizing the big firms as well as all the moderate size.
Thank you very much, Bob. That's an excellent point to end on. I'm afraid we didn't get to all the questions in the sidebar. There's some really good ones there, and including some quite technical ones. What we might do is follow up and put together a brief note. There's some useful stuff there. I'm going to close us out. I just want to say an enormous thank you to our panel. You are all fantastic advocates for apprenticeship and have done a really good job of explaining the role that staffing agencies can play in this space here. So thank you very much. For everyone who's attended, thank you. I hope you find the report useful and interesting. We will be emailing out a follow-up, share the slides and the recording and everything. But yeah, thank you for coming. And thank you all for your time. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Harry and all.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.